"So we are to be married," said the Duke of Vextcote, "or we are both to be ruined. I have read the will 3 times, Miss Braddock, and there is no third door. My great-uncle has seen to that. He was a spiteful old man, and this is his masterpiece." He stood at the window of the lawyer's chambers with his back to her, a tall, dark figure against the grey London light, and Keturah Braddock understood that he had turned his back deliberately, so that he need not look at the woman a dead man's malice had chained to him. She had heard of the Duke of Vextcote, as everyone had the most feared man in England. They called him cold as a January fen, a man whose tenants trembled and whose peers gave way, and who had not, in living memory, been known to want anything he could not simply take. And here he was, chained by a will to a penniless nobody, and he was furious, and he was making no effort to hide it, and Keturah, who had every reason to be frightened, found instead that she was thinking, with a cold clear calm that surprised her, that a man this angry was a man who had lost control of something, and that a man who had lost control was a great deal less frightening than a man who had it. "There is a third door, Your Grace," she said. "There is always a third door. You have simply not looked for it, because you are too busy being angry to look." He turned then. She saw his face for the first time, hard, and handsome in a cold forbidding way, and younger than his reputation, and under the fury, exhausted, and she saw him take her in, the plain, sensible, penniless woman in the turned gown, and dismiss her. And she watched the dismissal and was not wounded by it, because she had been dismissed by better men than the Duke of Vextcote, and learned long ago that a person's dismissal is a fact about them and not about you. "Enlighten me then," he said, and the contempt in it was meant to wither her. "You have seen a third door that my lawyers, who are the finest in England, have not. By all means, enlighten me, Miss Braddock, as to the door out of a will that leaves the whole of the Vextcote fortune, which is to say, the only thing standing between 4,000 tenants and ruin. For my estates are mortgaged to the roof, and I cannot save them without it. That leaves the whole of it to a foundling hospital, unless the Duke of Vextcote marries Miss Keturah Braddock within the 12-month. Show me the door. I should be delighted to be wrong." "The door," said Keturah, "is this, that you have been reading the will as a trap, and it is only a trap if we both insist on wanting different things. You want the fortune to save your tenants." She paused and decided, in that instant, on the honesty that would change everything. "I do not want the fortune at all, Your Grace. That is the door. That is the thing your lawyers could not see, because it never occurred to them or to you that anyone offered a fortune might not want it. I will tell you plainly what I want, because I have found that plainness saves a great deal of time, and I think we have neither of us any to waste." The Duke of Vextcote was looking at her now with an arrested expression, the contempt gone still. "My family is poor," Keturah said, "but not destitute. My father was a clergyman. He left us little, but he left us honest, and my brothers are provided for in modest ways, and I have kept house for an aunt these 6 years and been useful and unpaid and reasonably content. And I do not need a fortune, and I have never wanted one, because I have watched what fortunes do to people and I have not liked it. So here is my answer to your great-uncle's will, Your Grace, and it is the third door, and I have thought it out entirely in the last quarter hour while you have been glowering at the window. I will marry you, yes, because the alternative is 4,000 tenants ruined, and I will not have 4,000 people ruined to spare myself an unwanted marriage. That is not a price I am willing to make them pay for my comfort. I will marry you, and the whole of the Vextcote fortune will pass to you, exactly as your great-uncle intended, to save your estates and your people, but I will not touch 1 penny of it for myself. I will sign it all to you, absolutely, before the wedding, so that no one may ever say I married you for money, because I did not, and I will not have it thought that I did. I want nothing from the marriage but this, that you deal with me honestly as a partner and not a purchase, and that you only attempt. I ask no more to make of a thing forced upon us both something better than a prison. That is my answer, Your Grace. I will save your tenants and take nothing for it, and ask only that you try to be decent to me. I suspect it is not at all the answer you expected, standing there so angry at the window, certain you had been trapped by a fortune hunter, and I confess I am rather enjoying the look on your face, which is the look of a man who came prepared to fight, and has found nothing to fight against. The Duke of Vextcote stared at the plain, penniless woman who had just, in the space of 2 minutes, given away a fortune she had every legal right to demand, and asked in return only that he try to be decent, and the most feared man in England found that he had. For the first time in longer than he could remember, absolutely nothing to say. "You are giving away a fortune," the Duke of Vextcote said at last slowly, as though testing whether the words could possibly mean what they seemed to. "A fortune that is yours that will names you. You could take half of it, or all of it, or refuse me entirely and let it go to the foundlings and watch me ruined, and it is entirely within your right. And you are proposing, instead, to sign the whole of it to me, take nothing, and ask only that I try to be decent. Why? What is the catch? There is always a catch. I have spent my whole life among people who want things, and every one of them dress their wanting in some fine disguise, and I have learned to find the wanting under the disguise, always. So tell me the true one, Miss Braddock. What do you actually want?" "I have told you what I want," Keturah said. "I want 4,000 people not to be ruined, and I want not to be thought a fortune hunter, and I want to be dealt with honestly. That is all. I am aware it is unusual. I am aware you cannot believe it. You have spent your life among people who want things, you say, and so have I. Your Grace, I have kept house for a rich, selfish aunt for 6 years and watched the whole grasping machinery of people wanting things, and I came away from it having decided that I did not want to be one of them, that I would rather have little and be myself than have much and become the sort of clutching creature I watched every day. So there is no catch. There is only a woman who watched wanting up close and decided against it. I know you cannot believe me. You do not have to believe me. You have only to accept the terms which cost you nothing, which give you everything. In fact, the whole fortune, free and clear, and time will show you whether I am lying. If I am, you will find me out. Lies always slip, and you may despise me then with my blessing. And if I am not lying, if I really am simply a woman who does not want your money, and asks only to be treated decently, then you will have learned something you did not know was possible, which is that not everyone wants things, and it may do you good to learn it. For you have the look of a man who has been made very tired and very cold by a lifetime of being wanted." The Duke of Vextcote was quiet for a long moment. "You are very direct," he said. "I have found it saves time, as I said. And I have also found that people who are made uncomfortable by directness are usually people with a great deal to hide. And I do not think, Your Grace, that you have anything to hide except that you are a good deal more tired and a good deal less cold than you would like the world to believe. I have watched you this quarter hour. You are furious about this will, but you are furious, I think, chiefly because it threatens your tenants. 4,000 people you called ruined in a voice that was not cold at all when you said it. A truly cold man does not save 4,000 tenants. He lets the estates go and keeps his own comfort. You are mortgaged to the roof. You said you have beggared yourself trying to save your people, and you are exhausted and angry and cornered, and a dead man's spite has chained you to a stranger, and you came in here prepared to hate me. And instead I have offered to save your tenants and take nothing, and you cannot make it fit the shape of the world, you know, in which everyone wants things, and it has knocked you off your balance entirely, which is why the most feared man in England has been standing here for 5 minutes unable to find anything cutting to say. I am not your enemy, Your Grace. I am not a fortune hunter or a trap or a spiteful old man's revenge. I am simply a plain honest woman who has been chained to you by a will, exactly as you have been chained to me, and who has decided to make the best of it rather than the worst, and who would very much rather we were allies in this misfortune than enemies, because we are going to be married either way. And a marriage between allies is a great deal more bearable than a marriage between enemies, and I have always preferred the bearable to the bitter when both were on offer." The Duke of Vextcote looked at her for a long time, and something in his hard, exhausted face shifted, some fraction, some first small give. "You have thought this out completely," he said, "in a quarter of an hour, while I was glowering at the window." "I think quickly," Keturah said, "and I have had a great deal of practice at making the best of bad situations, having lived in a series of them my whole life. It is my chief accomplishment. I have no fortune, no beauty to speak of, no accomplishments the fashionable world would value. I do not sing, or paint or play. My aunt despaired of me. But I can look at a disaster and find, faster than anyone I have ever met, the one door out of it that leaves everyone least injured. It is a useless talent in a drawing room. It is turning out this morning to be rather a useful one. And I offer it to you, your grace, along with the fortune I do not want, and the honesty you cannot yet believe. A wife who can look your disasters, and you have the look of a man with a great many and find the least injurious door. It is not a romantic offer. It is not what either of us would have chosen, but is a real one, and it is on the table. And the alternative is 4,000 ruined tenants and 2 ruined lives. And I do not think, when you have finished being astonished, that you are going to refuse it, because whatever else you are, your grace, you are not, I think, a man who lets 4,000 people be ruined to spare his own pride. Am I right? You are right, said the Duke of Vexcote, and there was something in his voice now that had not been there when he stood at the window, something that was not quite warmth, but was no longer contempt, and had in it the first faint grudging note of respect. God help me, Miss Braddock, you are entirely right about the tenants and about a good deal else, and I have not been so thoroughly read by anyone in 10 years, and I do not know whether to thank you or to fear you, and I suspect the honester is both. Very well, I accept your terms. All of them, and I will add one of my own, which is that you will not sign away the whole of the fortune. Whatever you say, I will not marry a woman and leave her penniless and dependent on my decency, for decency is a poor security, and you are right not to trust it in a stranger. You will have a settlement of your own, independent, in your own name, whatever you say about not wanting money, because a woman with nothing of her own is at the mercy of a man's temper, and I will not have my wife at the mercy of mine, which is uncertain. Those are my terms in return now. It seems we are to be married. I find I am no longer angry, which is itself remarkable, and entirely your doing, and I have not the smallest idea what to make of you, which has not happened to me in a very long time, and which I find, to my own surprise, that I do not altogether dislike. The wedding was as unlike a great ducal wedding as it could be, and it was Keturah who insisted on it, and the insisting told the Duke of Vexcote a great deal about the woman he was marrying. He had assumed, insofar as he had thought about it at all through his fog of fury and exhaustion, that there would be some grand cold-souled ceremony, a fashionable affair to satisfy the world, and Keturah had said plainly at their second meeting that she would have nothing of the kind. We are marrying because a will forces us to save your tenants, she said, and I will not dress a forced thing up as a fashionable romance, because that would be a lie, and I do not begin with lies. Let us marry quietly in your own parish, before your own people, the tenants whose salvation this marriage is, and no fashionable strangers at all, because the fashionable strangers are nothing to us, and the tenants are the whole point. If I am to marry a man I have known a fortnight to save 4,000 people, then let those 4,000 people be the witnesses, and let it be honest and plain and about them, which is what it actually is, and not a glittering pretense about a love that does not yet exist. And so they were married in the small parish church at Vexcote, before the tenants, and it was the tenants' day as much as theirs, for they understood, these 4,000 people on the edge of ruin, that the strange marriage of their beggar duke to a plain stranger was the thing that would save them, and they came to the church not as spectators, but as people watching their own rescue. And there was in their faces a hope and a gratitude that moved Keturah more than any fashionable pageantry could have. She had married to save them, and here they were, the them she had saved, filling the church, and she understood. Standing at the altar beside the hard, cold stranger who was becoming her husband, that whatever this marriage was or was not between the two of them, it was, to these people, salvation, and that was reason enough to have made it, and more than enough. Vexcote itself, when he brought her home to it, told its own story of the man she had married. The great house was half shut and shabby, the grandeur worn thin. She had expected that. He had told her he was beggared. What she had not expected was what the shabbiness meant when she came to read it. That every economy in that great house had been made so that the economies need not be made in the cottages, that the Duke had let his own grandeur go threadbare rather than let a tenant's roof go unmended. that the half-shut rooms and the worn carpets and the reduced household were not neglect but sacrifice, the visible record of a man who had stripped his own comfort to the bone to keep faith with his people. She walked the shabby house on her first day reading it, and by evening she understood her husband better than he understood himself understood, that the hard, cold, exhausted man had a core of stubborn honor so deep that he had beggared himself for strangers rather than break faith, and that this, and not the coldness, was the true man, and that the coldness was only the scar tissue grown over a heart that had given away everything it had. "Your house is shabby," she said to him that first evening, "and I have worked out why, and I want you to know that I have. It is shabby because you would not let the cottages be shabby. You have worn your own grandeur to threads rather than let a tenant go cold. I have kept house for a rich, selfish woman for 6 years, Vextcoat, and I know exactly what a great house looks like when its master spends on himself and lets his people suffer, and it is the opposite of this. This house is shabby because its master is honorable, and I did not expect that, and it has changed my whole understanding of the man I have married. I thought I had married a cold, hard duke, cornered by a will. I find I have married a man who beggared himself for 4,000 strangers and grew hard doing it, which is a very different thing and a far better one, and I want you to know that I see it, the honor under the hardness, because I do not think anyone has to see it in a very long time. And a man ought to be seen for the thing he actually is, especially when the thing he actually is has cost him so much. The Duke of Vexcoat, who had not been truly seen by anyone in longer than he could remember, stood in his own shabby hall and was, for the second time in a fortnight, entirely without words before the plain, penniless woman a will had chained him to, who kept, disconcertingly, seeing straight through his armor to the man he had forgotten was underneath it. They were married quietly within the month, and Keturah went home with the Duke of Vexcoat to his great mortgaged estate in the west, and set herself to the task she had promised, to make of a forced thing something better than a prison. Vexcoat was a revelation, and not a happy one. She had known the Duke was mortgaged. She had not understood, until she saw it, the scale of what he had been carrying alone. The great house was half-shut and shabby, the grandeur worn thin. Every economy visible to an eye trained by 6 years of a poor relation's frugality, and the estate beyond it told the same story. But worse, for here the shabbiness had faces, tenants on the edge of ruin, cottages unmended. A whole countryside of people who depended on a duke whose fortune had been drained to nothing keeping them afloat. Keturah understood within a week exactly what her husband had done, and why he was so tired and so hard. He had inherited a bankrupt dukedom, mortgaged past saving, and rather than do the sensible cold thing, let the estates go, turn off the tenants, retreat to a smaller life and keep his own comfort, he had beggared himself for years trying to hold it all together, to save 4,000 people who would otherwise be ruined, and it had cost him everything. His fortune and his ease, and she suspected a great deal of his heart, until there was nothing left but the hard, exhausted shell of a man who had given all his warmth away to a losing fight and had none left over for himself, let alone a stranger wife. The Vexcoat fortune, when it came, for they married in time, and the will was satisfied, and the great inheritance passed to the Duke free and clear, changed everything and nothing. It saved the estates. The mortgages were cleared, the cottages mended, the tenants secured, and the crushing weight the Duke had carried for years lifted at last. But it did not at first, though the man, because a man does not unharden in a day, and the Duke of Vexcoat had been hard so long that hardness had become his resting shape. It was Keturah who thawed him, and she did it the way she did everything, by making the best of things quietly, without fuss, one day at a time. She did not press him. That was the wisdom of her, the thing that reached him where warmth or reproach would have failed. She had promised only to try to make the marriage bearable, and she kept to exactly that. She asked nothing of him, pressed for no affection, made no claim on the fortune, and simply set about being useful, being present, being in the great shabby house. A steady, undemanding warmth that the Duke of Vexcoat could stand near without being asked to feel anything. She took the household in hand it had gone to seed in the years of his beggared struggle, and made it comfortable again, not grand, but comfortable, warm, human. She went among the tenants and learned their names, and did for them the 100 small things a resident lady does that no steward can, and the tenants, who had known only the hard, exhausted Duke, took to his plain, kind wife at once and blessed the will that had brought her. And she was, in the evenings, simply company undemanding, quick, honest company, the thing the Duke of Vexcote had not had in years, a person to sit with, to talk to be quietly not alone with at the end of the long days. And the Duke of Vexcote, who had given all his warmth to a losing fight and had none left, found that warmth is not, after all, a thing that runs out, that a man drained dry can be filled again, slowly, by the simple steady presence of someone who asks nothing and gives much. And he began, over that first year, to thaw. "You have not once," he said to her, one evening some months in, "asked me for anything. Not money, you gave that away, which I still do not entirely understand. Not affection, you have never pressed me for a kind word, though God knows I have given you few enough. Not even gratitude, though you have earned an ocean of it, for you have taken a beggared and exhausted man and a shabby half-dead house and made both of them nearly whole again, and asked nothing for it. Every person I have ever known has wanted something from me and dressed the wanting up, and I have spent my life finding the wanting under the dress, and I have looked for yours for a year, Keturah, and I cannot find it, because there is not one. You really do not want anything. You really did marry me to save the tenants and take nothing, and you really have spent a year making my life bearable, and asked for nothing in return, and I have been waiting the whole year for the bill to come due, the hidden price, the thing you actually want, and it is not coming, because there is no bill, and I find I do not know how to live with a person who wants nothing from me, because I have never in my life met one, and it is undoing me completely. I want one thing," Keturah said, and she watched him tense, waiting for the bill at last. "I want you to stop waiting for the bill. That is all. It is the only thing I ever wanted from you, and you have just told me you cannot give it, because you have never met a person who wanted nothing, and so you cannot believe I am one, and you are braced, still after a year, for the price. And I want you to stop. Not for my sake, it does me no harm to be doubted, but for yours. Because a man who spends his whole life braced for the bill, waiting for everyone he meets to reveal the wanting under the warmth, is a man who can never once rest. Never once simply be cared for without suspicion, and it is a terrible way to live, and I have watched you live it for a year, and it grieves me. There is no bill, Vexcote. There never was. I married you to save the tenants, and I have stayed to make your life bearable, and I want nothing for it but to see you, once unbraced, to watch you accept, for a single evening, that someone is being kind to you for no reason but that they have come to care for you, with no price attached. No wanting underneath. That is the only thing I have ever wanted from you, and it is the one thing you find hardest to give, which tells me more about the life you have led than anything else you could say. So that is my answer, when you ask what I want. I want you to believe that I want nothing. It is a paradox, and it is the truest thing I know, and I will go on wanting it patiently for as long as it takes, because you are worth it, and because a man who has given all his warmth away to save 4,000 strangers deserves at last to have a little given back to him freely, with no bill at the end. The thaw began in earnest over a sick child in the 2nd month of the marriage, before the great fortune had even been settled. It was a bad winter, and a fever went through the Vexcote cottages. And one of the tenant families, a young couple named Harrod, with a house full of children, was hit hardest. 3 of the children down at once, and the youngest, a boy of 2, so bad that word came up to the house that he was not expected to live through the night. And Keturah, who had spent her first month learning the tenants' names and faces, heard of it, and did not hesitate. She called for the physician to be sent at the Duke's expense, and then she put on her plainest gown and her stoutest boots, and went down to the Harrods' cottage herself, through the snow, to sit with the sick children, because she had nursed her own younger brothers through fevers and knew what to do, and could not bear to sit warm in the great house, while a child died in the cold below. The Duke found out she had gone, and he did a thing that surprised even himself. He followed her. He did not know afterward quite why he had gone. He told himself it was to bring her home, that it was unseemly for a duchess to sit up in a tenant's cottage, that she would take the fever herself. But underneath, if he was honest, it was something else. It was that he had watched for a month this strange plain wife go among his people with a warmth he had lost the capacity for, and something in him wanted, obscurely, to be near it, to see it, perhaps even to learn it. And so the Duke of Vextcote, who had not set foot in a tenant's cottage in years except on grim business, walked down through the snow to the Harrods and found his wife on her knees by a truckle bed, sponging a fevered child, murmuring to the terrified young mother. Entirely at home in a one-room cottage with a dirt floor, doing the work of love as though she had been born to it, which, he understood, watching from the doorway he stayed. He did not know how to help. He had never in his life done such a thing, and Keturah, glancing up and seeing him in the doorway, did not send him away or make a fuss, but simply said, "Good, another pair of hands. Come and hold the little one while I see to his sister. He frets less when he is held. And I cannot hold him and tend her both." And the Duke of Vexcote, the most feared man in England, found himself sitting on a stool in a tenant's cottage in the middle of the night, holding a sick 2-year-old against his chest, awkward and terrified, entirely out of his depth, while the child, past caring who held him, burrowed into the warmth and quieted, and something happened in the Duke's chest, holding the small, hot, fretful weight of a dying tenant's child, that had not happened in years, some old frozen thing beginning painfully to crack. The boy lived. The fever broke near dawn, and the physician came, and the worst passed, and the young Harrods wept their gratitude, and Keturah and the Duke walked back up through the snow in the grey light of morning, exhausted, and neither spoke for a while. "You held him all night," Keturah said at last. "You did not have to. You could have brought me home, or sent servants, or done any of the cold, sensible things a duke does. Instead, you sat on a stool in a cottage and held a sick child until the fever broke. Why? I do not know," the Duke said honestly. "I have asked myself the same thing all night. I have not done such a thing, and I do not think I have ever done such a thing. I have saved my tenants with money and mortgages and sacrifice from a distance coldly, as a matter of duty and honor. I have never once sat in a cottage and held one of their children, and tonight I did, because you went, and I followed, and you handed me a child, and I held it, and Keturah, I felt something, holding that boy, something I had thought was dead in me. I have kept faith with these people for years, beggared myself for them, and felt nothing but grim duty the whole time, a cold obligation honorably discharged. And tonight I held one of their children through a fever, and I felt warmth, actual warmth, not duty. Care for a specific small person warm against my chest, and I do not know what to do with it, because I had built my whole self on the certainty that the warmth was gone, spent, dead, and here it is, come back over a sick child. Because you went down through the snow and I followed, and you handed me a boy to hold." He stopped in the snow and looked at her. "You are thawing me, Keturah. I do not think you are even trying to. You are simply being what you are, warm, and going where the warmth is needed, and I keep following you into it, and it keeps reaching me, the warmth, in places I had frozen over years ago. I do not know whether to thank you or to be afraid, because a frozen man does not always want to thaw. The thawing hurts. The frozen places are frozen for a reason. But I held that child and I felt it, and I cannot unfeel it now, and I think I do not want to. I think I have been frozen long enough. I think I would rather hurt and feel than go on being the cold man who felt nothing but duty. And it is your doing, and I do not fully understand it, but I am, this morning in the snow, more grateful for it than I know how to say." He told her in time why he had braced his whole life for the bill, and it explained the hard, exhausted man entirely. "I was wanted from the cradle," the Duke of Vexcote said, "for exactly one thing, which was the dukedom. My father made no secret of it. I was the heir, the vessel of the line, valued precisely and only for what I would one day inherit, and loved, insofar as I was loved at all, as one loves a fine investment, and everyone who came after him wanted the same thing in the same way. The girls who smiled at me wanted the coronet. The men who befriended me wanted the connection. My own relations circled the inheritance my whole life like crows around a dying thing, and I learned young that behind every warmth was a wanting, and that the wanting was always, in the end, for the dukedom. Never for me that there was, in fact, no me as far as the world was concerned, only the Duke of Vexcote, the title with a man inside it that no one troubled to look for. He was quiet a moment. And then I inherited, and found the dukedom was a rotting hulk, mortgaged, beggared, my father having spent and gambled the whole of it away behind the grandeur, and I had a choice. I could let it go, keep what remained for my own comfort, and let 4,000 tenants be turned off to ruin. Or I could beggar myself trying to save them, and I chose to save them not, I will tell you honestly, out of pure goodness, but partly out of spite, because I thought, the world has valued me my whole life for this dukedom and nothing else, and I will show them what the dukedom is actually worth, which is a debt of care to 4,000 souls, and I will pay that debt if it kills me, and let the world that only a wover wanted the coronet watch me spend the coronet down to nothing, keeping faith with people who cannot even thank me for it. It was half spite and half I do not know, duty. The one thing that was actually mine under the wanting, the tenants who needed me, whom no one else would save. So I beggared myself for them, and grew hard doing it, and told myself I did not mind that no one loved me, because everyone who had ever pretended to love me had only wanted the coronet, and now the coronet was worthless, and so at least the pretense had stopped, and a man alone with no one pretending is better off than a man surrounded by liars. That is the life you married into, Keturah. A man wanted his whole life for a thing, who spent the thing down to nothing out of spite and duty, and armored himself in the certainty that no one could love him because no one ever had, only the coronet, and the coronet was gone. And then I will change you to a stranger, Keturah said softly, who signed away the fortune and asked for nothing, and you could not fit her into the world you knew, in which everyone wants the coronet because she did not want it. She gave it back. She was the first person in your whole life who was demonstrably, probably, not after the thing you had been valued for, because she handed it to you and kept none of it. Do you see, vexed coat? That is why you cannot find my wanting. It is not that I am hiding it well. It is that the will made it impossible for me to want the one thing everyone has always wanted from you. I could not be after the coronet or the fortune, because I gave them to you and took nothing. The will itself is the proof, signed and witnessed, that I married you wanting none of the thing you have been valued for your whole life, and that is why I frighten you and undo you, and why you have waited a year for a bill that is not coming, because I am the one person you have ever met whom you can be certain does not want the coronet, and that certainty leaves only one possibility, which you cannot bear to look at, which is that if I care for you at all, and I do, vexed coat, I have come to this year, then I must care for the man, because there is nothing else left for me to care for. You have spent your life certain no one could love the man, only the coronet. And here is a woman who probably cannot want the coronet, and who cares for you anyway, and it means the thing you decided long ago was impossible, that the man under the coronet, the man no one ever troubled to look for, is worth caring for after all. That is what undoes you. Not that I want something, that I don't, and that caring for you anyway proves the one thing you have spent your whole life refusing to believe. The Duke of Vexcoat looked at his wife across the fire, and Keturah watched the thing she had been waiting a year for finally begin to happen. Watched the hard, exhausted armor, the certainty of a lifetime, begin at last to crack. You are saying, he said slowly, that you care for me. I am saying that I care for you, Keturah agreed. The man, not the coronet, since I gave the coronet away and kept the man. I did not mean to. I married you to save the tenants, but a year of making a hard, tired man's life bearable, of watching him beggar himself for 4,000 strangers out of half spite and half duty, of seeing the good buried man under the armor, a year of that, and I find I have come to care for you, plainly, the man himself, and it is the least fortune-hunting love in the history of England. Because there is no fortune in it for me, and we both have the signed and witnessed proof. So there is your bill at last, vexed coat, the thing you have waited a year for, the wanting under the warmth, and it turns out the only thing I want is the one thing you were sure no one could ever want, which is you, not the Duke, not the coronet, you. And you may believe it or not, but you cannot. This time explain it away as fortune hunting, because the will has made that impossible, and so you are left for the first time in your life, with the bare fact of being cared for yourself, with no coronet to hide behind, and no wanting to explain it away. I have cornered you into it, vexed coat. A dead man's spiteful will cornered you into being loved for yourself, which is the one thing your whole life armored you against, and it is the best thing that spiteful old man ever did, though he never meant it, and I am glad of it. And you may take as long as you need to believe it, and I will wait, because I have got rather good, this year, at waiting for you to unbrace. He unbraced slowly over that winter, the way a hand held clenched for years unbraces stiffly, painfully an inch at a time, with a soreness in the opening. Keturah watched it and helped it and did not hurry it. She had learned the man well enough by now to know that pressing would only make the hand clench again, and so she went on as she had gone on all year, undemanding, steady, present, and let him come to her at his own pace, the way a wary animal comes to a still hand. And he came. By midwinter they were more than allies. They were friends, real friends, two people who sat together in the evenings and talked with an ease that neither had known with anyone, and by the turn of the year they were something more than friends, though neither had yet said the word. A warmth growing between them that both felt and neither pressed, the slow, careful courtship of two people who had come to marriage backward and were only now falling in love inside it. The Duke of Vexcote fell in love with his wife the way a starving man learns to eat again, cautiously at first, distrusting it, half expecting to be sick, and then as it stayed down, as the warmth kept proving real and unbilled, with a growing, disbelieving hunger. He had armored himself against love his whole life, because love had always been a lie dressed over a wanting, and here was love that could not be a lie, because the wanting was provably absent, signed and witnessed. And once he had accepted that, once he had let himself believe at last that Keturah cared for the man and not the coronet, because there was no coronet left for her to care for. The armor did not merely crack, it fell away entirely, and what was under it astonished them both, for the hard, exhausted, cold Duke of Vexcote turned out to have, buried under a lifetime of armor, a great capacity for warmth, the very warmth he had spent on 4,000 tenants because he had no one else to spend it on, and when he finally had someone to give it to, someone who wanted the man and not the coronet, it came out of him in a flood. All the damned tenderness of a lifetime, and Keturah, who had married him to save the tenants and stayed out of a growing care, found herself, that winter, loved with an intensity that took her breath away. I did not know, he told her one night, that I had this in me. I thought I had spent it all, that I had given the whole of my warmth to the tenants and the fight and had nothing left. And it turns out I had only stored it, because there was no one to give it to who wanted the man. And now there is you, and it is all coming out at once, a lifetime of it, and I do not know what to do with the amount of it. Keturah, I love you. I have been trying to say it for a month, and it will not come out small. It comes out enormous, because it is a lifetime's worth arriving all at once. And I am 40 years old, and I have never said it to a living soul and meant it, and now I cannot stop meaning it. And it frightens me, and it is the best thing that has ever happened to me, both at once. He took her hands. You cornered me into being loved for myself, you said, and you were right, and I have never been so grateful to be cornered. A spiteful old man's will chain me to a stranger to save my tenants, and the stranger turned out to be the one person alive who could love the man under the coronet, because she was the one person alive who provably did not want the coronet. And the whole spiteful trap turned into the only door I ever had out of a lifetime's armor. I love you, Keturah Braddock. I love you for signing away the fortune, and for saving the tenants, and for asking nothing, and for waiting a year for me to unbrace, and for being the least fortune-hunting love in England, and for cornering me, with a dead man's will and your own stubborn honesty, into the thing I had decided was impossible, being loved for myself. There is no bill. I believe it at last. There is no bill, and there never was, and I have stopped waiting for it. And it is the greatest freedom I have ever known, and you gave it to me, and I will spend the rest of my life giving you back the lifetime of warmth I have been storing with nowhere to spend it. Marry me. I know we are married. Marry me again, in my heart, for real this time, not to save the tenants, not for a will, but 'cause I love you and you love me, and it is, against every expectation of either of us, a true marriage and the best thing in both our lives. I married you to save the tenants, Keturah said, weeping and smiling both, the only honest way, and I would do it again for that alone, and take nothing and be content. But it is a great deal better than content, Vexcote. What we have made it is the thing I watched other people grasp for their whole lives and never find. And we found it backward, in a forced marriage, out of a spiteful will, which only proves that the good things come sideways, through the wrong doors, when you have given up expecting them. I love you too, the man, not the coronet. I gave the coronet away and kept the man, and it was the best bargain I ever made. So yes, I marry you again in my heart, for real, for love, not for a will, and I want you to know that a year ago, standing in that lawyer's chambers, watching you glower at the window, furious and exhausted and certain you had been trapped, I could never have imagined this, and neither could you. And that is the thing I want us to remember always, that the worst seeming day a chaining, a trap, a spiteful old man's revenge turned out to be the door to the best of both our lives, and that we very nearly missed it, you in your armor and I in my resignation, and that we found it only because I decided to make the best of things, and you at last decided to let me. Make the best of things, Vexed Coat. It is the whole of my philosophy, and it has never once failed me, and it has just given us each other, out of a will meant to punish us both. Make the best of things. There is no better rule for a life. Keturah had 3 younger brothers, scattered and modestly provided for, and it was in his dealings with them that the Duke of Vexcoat first learned the pleasure new to him entirely of using his power to lift up people who had never once wanted anything from him. She had not asked him to help them. That was the thing that moved him, that Keturah, who would ask nothing for herself, also would not ask for her brothers, holding to her whole philosophy of wanting nothing, so that the Duke learned of the brothers' situations only gradually in passing. From the affectionate way she spoke of them, the eldest a curate on a wretched living, the second a clerk with more ability than opportunity, the youngest a boy still clever, with no money for the education his cleverness deserved. She spoke of them with love and never with a hint of appeal. And the Duke, listening, found that he wanted of his own accord, with no prompting to help them, and that the wanting was a wholly new pleasure, the pleasure of a man who has been valued for his power all his life, discovering, at last, that power is only worth having when you spend it on people who did not ask. He helped them quietly. He found the curate a good living in his own gift, a warm parish with a sound roof and a fair income. He took the clerk into the management of the Vexcoat estates, where his ability found the opportunity it had lacked, and watched him flourish. He sent the youngest boy to a good school, and then to the university, and took a real interest in him, and the boy who had grown up fatherless and poor found in the Duke of Vexcoat something like the father he had lost, and repaid it with a devotion that touched the Duke more than he expected. "You have made my brother's fortunes," Keturah said when it was done, "and I never asked you, and you never made me feel that I ought to have asked, or that it was a favor to be repaid. You simply did it quietly because you wanted to. Do you understand what that is? To a woman who spent 6 years watching her aunt do the opposite, give nothing without extracting a price, help no one without holding it over them forever. You have lifted my brothers up and asked nothing, made nothing of it, held nothing over them. It is the same thing I did for you with the fortune giving without a bill, and you have learned it, and you are doing it now to my brothers of your own accord, and it is the surest sign of how far you have come. The old Duke of Vexcoat could not have done it. He would not have understood the pleasure of it. He had been valued for his power so long that he could only see power as a thing to be guarded and traded. And now you spend it freely on people who cannot repay you, for the pure pleasure of the lifting, which is the only pleasure power has ever truly held, and almost no one who has power ever learns it. You have learned it. My brothers are the proof. And I love you for it more than for anything, because it means the warmth I saw under your armor was real, and it has come all the way out, and it is spending itself now not on grim duty but on free glad generosity, which is the thing warmth is for. I did not know, the Duke said, that giving could be a pleasure. I want you to understand that, because it is the measure of the man I was. I gave to my tenants for years, and it was never a pleasure. It was duty and sacrifice and grim honor, a debt discharged at myself, felt as a weight. I did not know that giving could be light, could be joy, could be the best pleasure a fortunate man has. And I learned it from you, and from your brothers, who wanted nothing and were delighted by everything, so that helping them was pure joy with no weight of obligation in it, because there was no bill on either side ever. That is the thing you have taught me, Keturah, over and over, in 100 forms, that the whole misery of my old life was the bill, the wanting under every warmth, the price under every gift, the endless grim transaction that made even generosity a burden, and that on the far side of the bill, in the country of giving without a bill that you live in. Everything is light, giving is light, being cared for is light, loving is light. I lived my whole life in the heavy country, where everything had a price, and you have carried me across the border into the light country, where things are simply given and simply received, and I did not know it existed, and it is the only place worth living, and I am never going back. You have not only thawed me, my love, you have taught me where the warmth is for which is to give it away freely for the joy of it to people who did not ask, and is the best thing I have ever learned, and I have your brother's and your aunt's bad example, and a spiteful old man's will to thank for it, and above all you, who wanted nothing, and taught a man who had been wanted his whole life the one thing he had never known, how light a life becomes when you stop keeping the bill. The trouble came in the spring in the shape of a cousin, and it threatened everything. His name was Mr. Crispin Sallow, a distant connection of the dead great-uncle's, and under the terms of the will he was the residuary heir, the man to whom the whole Vextcote fortune would pass if, for any reason, the marriage between the Duke and Keturah were found to be no true marriage. He was a sleek, clever, litigious man, and he had watched the fortune slip past him to the Duke with a bitterness that curdled, over the year, into a scheme, and in the spring he brought suit to void the marriage and claim the inheritance, on the grounds that it was collusive and fraudulent, a sham entered solely to satisfy the letter of the will while defeating its spirit. His argument, laid out by expensive lawyers, was cleverer than the Duke had feared. The great-uncle's will, Sallow contended, had plainly intended a true marriage, a joining of the two heirs into one household and one line, the fortune passing to a genuine union. But what had actually occurred? A penniless stranger had married the Duke and immediately signed away every penny of the fortune, taking nothing, which proved, Sallow argued, that it was no true marriage at all, only a hollow legal ceremony performed to unlock the money. A collusive arrangement between two strangers to grab an inheritance neither could get alone, exactly the kind of cynical evasion the will's conditions were designed to prevent. A true bride does not sign away her entire fortune, Sallow's lawyers thundered. A true marriage is not a business transaction between strangers to feed a testator's intent. The very generosity Keturah had shown, the signing away that had proved her honest, was now being turned into the evidence against her, twisted into proof that the marriage was a fraud. It is monstrous, the Duke said, when he understood it, white with a fury Keturah had not seen since the lawyer's chambers a year before. The one honest thing you did, signing away the money, taking nothing, proving you were no fortune hunter, he is using it to prove the opposite, to prove the marriage a sham. Your honesty is the weapon in his hand, and if he wins... Keturah, if a court finds our marriage collusive and voids it, the fortune reverts to him, and the mortgages I paid off with it, the cottages I mended, the tenants I secured, all of it unravels, because the money that saved them was never truly mine, and it goes to Sallow. And 4,000 people are ruined after all, a year later, by a cousin's greed and a lawyer's cleverness. He has found the one thread that could undo everything, and he is pulling it, and I do not. His voice cracked. I do not see the door, Keturah. For the first time since I met you, I do not see the door out. Keturah was quiet for a long moment, thinking in the way he had come to know and rely upon the quick, clear searching of the least injurious door. That was her one great talent, and then she said slowly, "There is a door, Vextcote. There is always a door. And Mr. Sallow, clever as he is, has left it wide open, because his whole case rests on a single claim that happens now to be false, and it was true when we married, which is what makes his case so clever, but it is not true anymore, and he does not know it, and that is the door." She looked up. His argument is that our marriage is a sham, hollow, collusive, no true union, a mere transaction between strangers to grab the money. And a year ago that was, I will admit, nearly true. We married as strangers, forced, for the tenants and the fortune, and there was no love in it, and had he brought his suit then, it might have had the ring of truth. But it is not a year ago, Vextcote, it is now, and now our marriage is not a sham. It is the truest thing in either of our lives. We love each other really deeply, probably, the whole household knows. The tenants have watched it. There is not a soul at Vextcote who does not know that the Duke and Duchess are besottedly, genuinely in love. Mr. Sallow's whole case is that our marriage is not a real marriage, and the answer the door is simply the truth that it is. That whatever it was at the start, whatever a will forced upon us, it has become over a year, exactly the genuine loving union the testator intended, more genuine, I should think, than most marriages made in the ordinary grasping way. He is trying to prove we are strangers in a hollow arrangement. And we have only to show the court what we actually are, which is two people who came to love each other truly inside a marriage that began as a bargain, and his case collapses. Because you cannot void a real marriage by proving it began as a forced one, when it has plainly become real. The irony. Vextcoat is exquisite. He is going to force us to prove, in open court before the world, exactly how much we love each other, and we are going to do it gladly and win. And the very thing he thinks is his weapon, the strangeness of our beginning, is going to become the most romantic story the county has heard in a generation, the forced marriage that turned to true love, and he is going to be laughed out of court by the sheer obvious warmth of what we have become. Let him bring his suit. Let him try to prove our love is a sham. There is no case in England easier to answer than a charge you can disprove simply by being in open court, exactly what you already are. The suit we were hearing in the summer, and it went exactly as Keturah had foreseen, and better. For Mr. Sallow's case, clever as it was on paper, ran aground the moment it met the living fact of the marriage it claimed was a sham. His lawyers argued collusion and fraud and hollow arrangement, and then the Duke and Duchess of Vextcoat were called, and the whole edifice of the argument dissolved in the plain sight of what they were. It was not that they performed a great show of devotion. They did not need to, and Keturah had counselled against it. We do not act. We simply are. A performed love looks false, and a real one shows without acting. We have only to be ourselves and let them look. And so they were themselves in open court, and the court looked and saw two people who finished each other's sentences, who turned to each other by instinct, whose whole bearing toward one another was so plainly, unforcedly loving that the charge of a hollow sham withered on the lawyer's lips. And then Keturah spoke, when the court asked her to answer the charge, and she did not answer it with legal argument. She answered it with the truth plainly, in the way that had disarmed the Duke a year before in a lawyer's chambers, and it disarmed the court exactly as thoroughly. Mr. Sallow says our marriage is a sham, she said, collusive, hollow, no true union, entered only to grab a fortune. And I am going to tell the court the truth, all of it, because I have found that plainness saves a great deal of time and defeats a great deal of cleverness. When the Duke and I married, a year ago, Mr. Sallow's charge would have been nearly fair. We married as strangers. We married because a will forced us to, and because 4,000 tenants would otherwise be ruined, and there was no love in it. And I signed away every penny of the fortune because I would not be thought a fortune hunter, and took nothing, and asked only that my husband try to be decent to me. That is the truth of how we began, and I will not pretend otherwise, and Mr. Sallow is welcome to make what he can of it. But a marriage, my lord, is not only how it begins, it is what it becomes, and I stand here a year later, and I will tell this court, under oath, the plain fact that every soul at Vextcoat already knows, that I love my husband truly deeply, and that he loves me, and that whatever forced and loveless thing our marriage was at the start, it has become, over a year, the realest and best thing in both our lives, a true union. Exactly as the testator intended, arrived at not in the ordinary way but backward, through a forced door, which does not make it one grain less real. Mr. Sallow argues that because I took no money, the marriage must be a sham. He has it exactly backward. I took no money because I did not marry for money, which is the surest possible proof that whatever I did marry for, and whatever I have stayed for, and whatever I feel now, it is not greed but something truer. My generosity is not evidence of fraud, my lord. It is the very opposite. It is the proof that this marriage was never about the fortune for me, which means that the love I now bear my husband, having taken not a penny, is the least mercenary love in England. Mr. Sallow wishes to void a true marriage by proving it began as a forced one. But you cannot unreal a real thing by showing it had a strange beginning. My husband and I love each other. It is a fact, plain and provable, and known to everyone who has watched us this year. And no cleverness of Mr. Sallow's can make a real love into a sham merely by reminding the court that it grew, against all expectation, out of a forced and loveless start. Many of the truest things in this world grow out of unpromising beginnings. Ours did. That is not fraud, my lord. That is a marriage a better one, I should think, than most, for having been chosen freely, in love, after it was entered by force. The court found for the Duke and Duchess of Vexcote, and it did not take long. Mr. Sallow's suit collapsed under the plain weight of a marriage that was manifestly, obviously, unactably real, and the judge, an old man not much given to sentiment, remarked from the bench that in a long career he had heard a great many suits attempting to prove that marriages entered for money were shams, and this was the first he had ever heard attempting to prove that a marriage entered for no money was a sham, and that he found the argument as novel as it unpersuasive, and that if giving away a fortune and then falling genuinely in love with one's spouse was fraud, then he wished a great deal more fraud were practiced in the marriages that came before his court, which were mostly the other kind. The fortunes stood, the tenants were secure, and Mr. Crispin Sallow left the court having achieved the exact opposite of his intention, for his suit had forced the Duke and Duchess to declare their love in open court, publicly on the record, and the story of it ran through the county and beyond as the romance of the age. The forced marriage out of a spiteful will that had turned, against all the world's expectation, into the truest love match in England, defended and proven in open court against a greedy cousin who had tried and spectacularly failed to prove that real love was fraud. He did us a favour, Keturah observed, on the drive home from the court, Mr. Sallow. He meant to ruin us, and instead he made us declare our love before the whole world on the record, permanently, so that no one can ever again whisper that ours was a marriage of convenience. The court itself has ruled it a true love match. He has made our love a matter of legal record. There is a certain justice in it, that a man who tried to prove our marriage a sham has instead given us the most authoritative possible proof that it is real. We should send him a note of thanks. We will not, of course, but we should. And the Duke of Vexcote laughed the free full laugh that a year of Keturah had taught him, that the hard, exhausted man of the lawyer's chambers could never have produced, and drew his wife against him in the carriage, and said, "We will send him nothing but our continued and conspicuous happiness, which will punish him far more than any note, for there is nothing a man like Sallow can less endure than the sight of the people he tried to ruin being joyfully, publicly, permanently glad. Let us go home, Keturah, and be so happy that Crispin Sallow hears of it in his club and chokes on his port. It is the only revenge worth taking, and it happens also to be the thing I want most in the world, which is the great advantage of a happy marriage, that the sweetest revenge and the deepest joy turn out to be exactly the same thing. The Vexcote fortune, secured now past any cousin's reach, did in the years that followed exactly what the Duke had beggared himself trying to do alone, and could not. It made the estate whole, and more than whole, and it did it under the joint hand of a Duke and Duchess who had each, in their different ways, learned that a fortune is a debt of care and not a source of pride. They spent it well. The mortgages were long cleared. Now they went further, rebuilt the failing farms, drained the bad land, put up new cottages and mended the old, founded a school and endowed a physician for the district, so that the Vexcote lands, which had been sliding toward ruin under a beggared duke, became within a decade one of the most prosperous and best-ordered estates in the West, and the 4,000 tenants the Duke had nearly ruined himself to save came to bless not only him but his Duchess, and the strange will that had brought her, and the spiteful old man whose malice had, against all his intention, been the saving of them all. For that was the great irony the Duke never tired of turning over, that his great uncle, a bitter spiteful man who had drawn his will to punish and to trap, meaning to chain two people he disliked into a miserable marriage as his last cruel joke on the world, had, without the smallest intention of any good, been the author of the greatest happiness of the Duke's life, and the salvation of 4,000 tenants, and the truest love match in the county. He meant it as spite, the Duke said, and it came out as grace. He meant to trap us, and he freed us. He meant to punish me for being the heir he resented, and he handed me the one woman in England who could love the man under the coronet, and the fortune to save my people, and a happiness he himself never knew a single day of in his whole bitter life. I have stopped being angry at him. I have even, God help me, started being grateful to him, which would enrage him more than anything, that his spite brought me joy. It is the best proof I know that a life is not in the intending but in the outcome, that even malice, even the worst intention, can be turned, by two people determined to make the best of it, into the best of everything. Keturah turned it. She took a spiteful old man's trap and made it a marriage, and a fortune's curse and made it 4,000 people's salvation, and a forced chaining and made it love. She makes the best of things. It is her whole philosophy. And I have watched it now for 10 years transform every disaster it touches, and I have come to believe it is the deepest wisdom there is almost no situation so bad that a determined, clear-eyed, unbitter soul cannot find in it the door to something good. If only they refuse to waste their strength on resentment and spend it instead on making the best. Keturah became, as Duchess of Vexed Coat, exactly the kind of great lady that her 6 years as a poor relation had taught her to be, which is to say, the opposite of the grasping ones she had watched. She kept nothing for show. She had, at the Duke's insistence, her own independent settlement. Now he had insisted on it from the first, and she had let him, understanding it was his way of caring, but she lived plainly and spent lavishly, on the tenants, on the school, on the district, on everyone but herself, exactly as she had always meant to if she ever had means, so that the woman who had signed away a fortune rather than be thought to want it turned out, given a fortune, to want nothing of it for herself and everything of it for others, which surprised no one who knew her and astonished the fashionable world, which could not understand a duchess who dressed plainly and spent her money on drains. "You are the strangest great lady in England," the Duke told her fondly, watching her come in muddy and cheerful from some errand among the cottages. "You have a duke's fortune at your command, and you dress like a parson's daughter and spend your days seeing to the tenants' roofs. The fashionable world does not know what to make of you." "The fashionable world," said Keturah, "spent 6 years looking straight through me when I was a poor relation, and now fawns on me because I am a duchess, and I have exactly the same opinion of its regard now that I had of its contempt then, which is that it is worth nothing at all, because it follows the coronet and not the woman, exactly as everyone's regard followed the coronet and not the man with you. We are alike in that, Vexed Coat, we have both been valued for a thing and not for ourselves. You your whole life, and I in reverse, ignored when I had nothing and courted when I had a title, and it has taught us both the same lesson, which is to trust only the regard that came before the coronet, yours for me, which came when I had signed the fortune away and could offer you nothing but honesty, mine for you, which came when the coronet was worthless, and there was only the tired hard man under it. That is the only regard worth having, the kind that came before the coronet or after it was gone, the kind that is probably for the person and not the position. And we have it, each from the other, and it is the rarest thing in the world, and it makes the fashionable world's fawning look exactly as cheap as it is. Let them fawn. We know what their regard is worth. We have each been loved for ourselves, which almost no one in our position ever is, and it has made us both, I think, incapable of ever again mistaking the coronet's shadow for the real thing. That is your great-uncle's true bequest. In the end, not the fortune, but that, two people who can never again be fooled by the regard that follows a title, because each has been loved by the other for exactly the self under it. He could not have given us a greater gift if he had spent his whole bitter life trying, which he certainly did not. There came a day some years into the marriage when a man from the Duke's old life appeared at Vexed Coat, and the visit showed the Duke, more clearly than anything, the whole distance he had travelled. His name was Lord Pharamond Crail, and he had been in the Duke's cold young days the nearest thing the Duke of Vexed Coat had to a friend, a charming, fashionable man who had attached himself to the young heir, and whom the young Duke had valued precisely because Crail had seemed not to want anything, had seemed to offer simple friendship in a world of graspers. And then the Duke had inherited the beggared dukedom and discovered its true state, and Crail had melted away within the season, the friendship revealed as exactly the same wanting as all the rest. Crail had wanted the connection to a rich young Duke, and when the Duke proved poor, the connection lost its value and Crail had gone where the money was, It had been one of the sharpest of the young Duke's disillusionments, and one of the reasons he had armoured himself for good. And now Crail was back, for the Vexcote fortune was restored, and known to be restored. And Lord Pharamond Crail had a fine nose for restored fortunes, full of warm reminiscence and old affection, calling on his dear old friend, delighted to hear of his good fortune, and hoping, over the course of a long ingratiating visit, that his dear old friend might see his way to a small loan. A mere trifle, between friends, to relieve a temporary embarrassment. The old Duke of Vexcote would have been wounded by it, would have felt again the sharp old betrayal, the confirmation that everyone wanted the coronet and no one the man. But the Duke that Keturah had made only watched Lord Crail with a clear, unwounded, almost pitying eye, and saw him whole, and was not hurt at all, because he had at last something to measure Crail against. "I am not going to lend you money, Crail," he said pleasantly, when the man had finished his long approach, "and I am going to tell you why, plainly, because I have learned from my wife that plainness saves a great deal of time. You are here because my fortune is restored. You were my friend when I was a rich young hare, and you vanished the week you learned I was beggared, and you have reappeared the season you learned I am rich again, and you have spent this whole visit performing an affection you do not feel in order to extract a loan you do not mean to repay. It is exactly what you did 15 years ago, and it wounded me deeply then, because I thought you were the one man who wanted the friendship and not the fortune, and you taught me you wanted the fortune like all the rest, and I armoured myself against friendship for years because of it. So I owe you something. In a way you were one of my great lessons in the wanting of the world." He leaned back. "But here is what has changed, Crail, and why you do not wound me now as you did then. I have since married a woman who wanted nothing, who signed away a fortune rather than be thought to want it, and has spent 10 years wanting nothing from me but that I be decent and giving everything and asking nothing. And once a man has known that once he has been loved by someone who provably does not want the coronet, he can never again be wounded by the Crails of the world, because he has something to measure you against, and the measure makes you small. You do not hurt me, Crail. You only make me sad. A little and grateful, a great deal sad that you have spent your whole life wanting things and performing affection to get them, which is a wretched way to live, as I know, having watched my wife's aunt do it, into a miserable grave, and grateful, because standing next to my wife, you are the clearest possible proof of what I was saved from, and what I found instead. No, I will not lend you money, but I will give you, freely, the one thing that might actually help you, which is the truth, which is this. The wanting is the trap, Crail. You have spent your life wanting and performing and grasping, and has left you here at 50, begging a loan from a man you betrayed, with no true friend in the world, because you never once offered true friendship, only the performance of it in pursuit of advantage. Stop wanting. Learn to want little. It is the only freedom there is, and it is not too late, even for you, and it is the only thing I have to give you that is worth having, and I give it freely with no bill, which is a thing you have never once received in your life and would do well to consider. Good day, Crail. I wish you better than you have wished me. My wife taught me how." Lord Pharamond Crail left Vexcote empty-handed and, for perhaps the first time in his life, genuinely unsettled, not by a refusal, for he had been refused before, but by the strange unwoundedness of the man who refused him, the pity in it, the freedom of a man who plainly wanted nothing Crail had, and could not be reached by any of Crail's arts. And the Duke of Vexcote, watching him go, felt the old betrayal finally, fully healed, not by revenge, but by the simple fact that he had at last been loved for himself, and that a man who has been loved for himself cannot be wounded by the discovery that others love him for his fortune, because he has the real thing, and the real thing makes the counterfeit powerless. Crail came to remind me of the man I was, he told Keturah that evening, and instead he showed me the man I have become, which is a man who cannot be hurt by the wanting of the world any more, because he has been loved past it. You did that. 15 years ago that man's greed would have wounded me for a month. Today it did not touch me, because I had you to measure him against, and next to you he was only small and sad and to be pitied. That is what your love has made me, a man the Crails of the world cannot reach. It is a kind of armor, but the opposite of the old kind. The old armor kept everyone out, and this keeps nothing out. It simply makes the wanting of others powerless to wound, Because I have the one thing that answers all of it, which is to be loved for myself. You have not taken my armor and left me defenseless, Keturah. You have replaced it with something far better, a heart so fully loved that it cannot be wounded by not being loved, which is the only true invulnerability there is, and the only one worth having. They had children, and the Duke of Vexcote, who had been valued from the cradle for the coronet he would inherit and never for himself, made it the central labor of his fatherhood to value his own children for exactly the opposite for themselves, plainly, whatever they inherited or did not. So that no child of his should ever grow up as he had, a self unlooked for inside a title, loved as an investment and never as a person. He told Keturah his fear, before their first was born, in the way he now told her everything. I am afraid, he said, that I will do to my children what was done to me veu the hair for the hairship, love the children as vessels of the line, the way my father loved me, which was not love at all, but a kind of careful husbandry of an investment. It is what I was taught, it is all I saw. And I am afraid it is in me, and that I will pass it on without meaning to, and raise another generation of vexed coats who are titles, with unlooked-for people inside them. You will not, Keturah said, and I know exactly how I know, because you have just named the fear, and a man who fears above all things valuing his child for the coronet is a man who will watch himself for it every day, and do the opposite the instant he catches it. Your father never feared it, he thought it right, the careful husbandry of an heir. He passed it on with a clear conscience. You fear it with your whole soul, because you know from the inside the exact size of the wound it leaves, and that fear is not the sign you will fail. It is the guarantee you will not. You will raise children who know every day that they are loved for themselves and not for what they will inherit, precisely because you know in your own body what it is to grow up unsure of that, and there is no one so careful to give a child that certainty as a parent who grew up without it. The wound your father gave you will become, in your hands, the exact thing that heals your children. It is the pattern of everything, vexed coat. The worst things become the seeds of the best, if you refuse to pass them on and choose, instead, to give your children the thing you lacked. You lacked being loved for yourself. You will drown your children in it. And the vexed coat line, which valued its hairs as investments for 200 years, will produce, starting with ours, children who are loved as people, and it will be because a poor relation signed away a fortune and cornered a hard man into being loved for himself and taught him, in the learning, how to love his children the same way. That is what we are making, my love, not just happy children. The end of a 200-year mistake. The heir who is loved as a person, it begins with ours. And it did. The Duke of Vexcote loved his children with the whole flood of warmth that a lifetime's armor had damned and Keturah had released, loved them plainly, openly, for themselves. The heir no more and no less than the younger ones, so that his children grew up in the thing he had never had, the plain daily certainty of being loved for exactly who they were, and grew into people of an ease and a warmth and a lack of grasping that the Vexcote line had not produced in living memory. His eldest, who would be Duke one day, was raised to understand the coronet exactly as his parents understood it, not as a prize or a source of pride, but as a debt of care to 4,000 souls, and would be, everyone said, the best Duke of Vexcote in 2 centuries, because he had been loved as a person and taught to see his inheritance as a responsibility, which is the only combination that makes a great man out of a great title. He is everything I was not, the Duke said to Keturah, watching their son among the tenant's children, easy and kind and unaware of any distance between himself and them. Loved as a person from the cradle. Certain of it. It has made him warm in a way I had to learn late and at great cost, and it will make him a better master than I could ever be, because a man who has never doubted he is loved has warmth to spare, where a man who doubted it his whole life has only what he can painfully learn. You did that. You gave our son the thing you gave me, the certainty of being loved for himself, only you gave it to him from the beginning, so that he will never have to learn it late through a wall of armor as I did. He starts where I finished. That is what a good parent does, I think, gives the child the thing they had to fight for, so that the child can start from there and go further. Our son starts warm. God knows where he will go, starting warm, when I got so far starting cold. And it is all you're doing, Keturah, all of it. Traceable to a will and a lawyer's chamber, and a plain honest woman who decided to make the best of things, and I give thanks for it every single day, and I will to the end, that a spiteful old man chained me to the one woman in England who could turn his spite into the saving of my whole line. He asked her, once, where she had learned it, the making the best of things, the deciding against wanting, the whole clear, unbitter philosophy that had turned his life over, and Keturah told him about the 6 years with her aunt, which explained the whole of her as his own history explained him. My Aunt Prudentia, she said, was rich and selfish and unhappy, and I kept house for her for 6 years after my father died, because it was that or the workhouse, and there was no third door I could find, and I looked hard. And those 6 years were my education, vexed not in accomplishments. I told you I never learned to sing or paint, but in the thing that mattered, which was watching up close day after day, exactly what wanting does to a soul. My aunt had everything: money, health, a fine house. No cares she had not invented, and she was the most miserable creature I have ever known, because she wanted ceaselessly everything and always more money, more precedence, more attention, more advantage over her neighbors, an endless grasping that no amount of getting ever satisfied. Because the wanting was the disease and the getting was not the cure but the food, I watched her want herself into misery for 6 years. I watched her poison every relationship she had with the wanting, could not have a friend without wanting something from them, could not receive a kindness without suspecting the wanting under it, could not rest 1 hour because there was always something more to want. And I decided, somewhere in the 3rd or 4th year watching her, that I would rather have nothing and be free of the wanting than have everything and be enslaved to it as she was. That is where I learned it. Not from virtue, from horror. From 6 years of watching up close what a life of wanting does, and deciding with my whole soul against it. So when the will offered me a fortune, I did not have to think twice about signing it away, because I had spent 6 years watching a fortune make a woman wretched, and I knew, better than most, that the money was not the prize but the trap, and that the truly rich person is the one who has learned to want little, because they alone are free, and everyone else, however much they have, is a slave to the next thing they lack. You gave away a fortune, the Duke said slowly, because you had watched a fortune destroy a woman, and you would rather be free than rich. I would rather be free than rich, Keturah agreed, and I am, and it is the best bargain I ever made, and it is the thing I most want our children to learn. More than any accomplishment, that the wanting is the disease, and that freedom lies not in getting what you want, but in learning to want little, so that you are not at the mercy of the next thing you lack. My aunt died a few years ago, rich and wretched to the last, wanting still on her deathbed. Wanting more time, more attention, more of everything, and dying angry because she could not have it, and I went to her funeral, which almost no one else did, because she had wanted her way through every relationship she ever had until there was no one left who loved her. And I stood at her grave and felt not triumph, and not even much grief, but a great clean gratitude to her of all things, because she had taught me, by her wretched example, the one lesson that made the whole of my happiness possible, that wanting is the trap, and freedom from wanting is the only wealth. She gave me that, my poor unhappy aunt, without meaning to, exactly as your great-uncle gave you me without meaning to. It is the strangest thing, vexed coat, how the bitter people in our lives, the ones who meant us only ill or nothing at all, turn out to have given us, by their bad example or their spite, the very things that saved us. My aunt taught me to want nothing, by wanting everything and being wretched. Your great-uncle chained you to me by his spite and freed you. The 2 most bitter people in our 2 lives are the joint authors of our whole happiness, and neither of them meant a particle of good, and it did not matter, because we made the best of what they gave us, and the best turned out to be everything. There is no bitterness that cannot be turned, my love. That is the whole of what I know. There is no bitterness, however deep, that a determined unbitter soul cannot turn in time into the seed of something good. My aunt's wretchedness, your great-uncle's spite, even that we turned. Especially that we turned. It is the only philosophy I have, and it has never once failed me, and I mean to spend my whole life proving it, and I have you now to prove it with, which is more than I ever dared to want, back when I had learned to want nothing at all. There was one custom the Duke and Duchess of Vexcote kept that told the whole story of their strange beginning, and the tenants came to love it above all the year's occasions. Every autumn, on the anniversary of their wedding, they held a great feast for the whole estate, not a grand affair for the fashionable neighbours, but a true harvest home for the 4,000 souls whose salvation the marriage had been, all of them, high and low together. In the great hall of Vexcote that had stood half-shut and shabby the day Keturah first saw it, and was now, underhand, warm and whole and blazing with light. And at the feast, every year, the Duke of Vexcote told the whole improbable story of how he had come to be married. The spiteful Will, the lawyer's chamber, the furious Duke glowering at the window certain he had been trapped, plain penniless woman who had, in the space of a quarter-hour, given away a fortune, saved 4,000 tenants, and asked in return only that he try to be decent. The tenants never tired of it, because it was, in the truest sense, their story, the tale of the day their salvation was decided, when a stranger they had never met chose, in a lawyer's chamber 100 miles away, to save them at the cost of her own fortune. Before she had ever seen one of their faces, they loved her for it with a fierce devotion that the years only deepened. The Duchess, who had signed away a fortune to save people she had never met, and who had then come among them and learned their names and mended their roofs and been, for the rest of her life, the truest friend the Vexcote tenants ever had. You always tell it wrong, Keturah complained, every year, as was their ritual. You make yourself sound like a villain, the furious Duke certain he had been trapped, and me sound like a saint. It was not like that. I was frightened and calculating, and I gave away the fortune half because I did not want it, and half because I saw at once that it was the fastest way to disarm a dangerous man, which it was. There was as much strategy in it as saintliness. Do not make me a saint. I cannot bear to be made a saint. It is inaccurate, and it is dull, and saints are tiresome company. I make you exactly what you were, the Duke said, to the delighted hall, which is a woman who walked into a lawyer's chamber to meet the most feared man in England, found him furious and cornered and dangerous. In a quarter of an hour, disarmed him completely, saved 4,000 tenants, gave away a fortune, and asked in return only that he try to be decent, and who did it all while frightened, which is the part that makes it not saintliness but courage. For a saint who feels no fear is only doing what comes easily, and a frightened woman who does the brave, clear, generous thing, anyway, is the finest thing there is. I do not make you a saint, Keturah. I make you braver than a saint. And the tenants know the difference, and love you for the courage and not the sainthood, because courage is a thing a plain, frightened person can aspire to, and sainthood is not, and it is your courage that saved them, and they know it, and the hall would roar its agreement, and Keturah would submit to being celebrated with her usual dry protest, and the Duke of Vexcote, the hard, exhausted man of the lawyer's chamber, unrecognizable now, warm and easy and openly adoring, would look down the length of the great warm hall at the 4,000 souls his marriage had saved and the wife who had saved them, and think that a spiteful old man's will had, against every intention, given him the only 3 things worth having: his people secured, his line healed, and a woman who had cornered him, with nothing but honesty and a quick, clear mind, into the whole of a happiness he had spent his life certain he could never have. I have thought sometimes, he said to her, one such autumn night, when the hall had emptied and the fires burned low, about how nearly it went the other way, if you had wanted the fortune, as any sensible person would have. If you had taken your half and refused me, and let me be ruined, which was your right. If you had been the fortune hunter I was braced for, instead of the one woman in England who did not want the money. A dozen ways it might have gone, and every one of them would have left me the hard, cold, ruined man I was, and you a stranger I hated, and instead you gave the fortune away and disarmed me and made the best of things, and here we are. It frightens me how nearly it never was. It does not frighten me, Keturah said, as she always said, taking his hand in the emptying hall, because the near thing is not the point. What matters is not how nearly it failed, but that it did not, that 2 people, handed a spiteful trap, chose to make the best of it rather than the worst, and kept choosing it, day after day, for all these years, until the trap became a marriage, and the marriage became a love, and the love became this whole warm hall full of saved and happy people. We did not fall into this, vexed coat. We chose it, every day, out of a thing that could as easily have been a prison. That is not luck. That is the making of the best, which is a thing you do, not a thing that happens to you, and we did it, and we are still doing it, and we will do it to the very end, and that is why it does not frighten me how nearly it went the other way. Because the making of the best is always available, whatever the beginning, however spiteful the will, there is always a door. I have found it every time, and I found it in a lawyer's chamber 10 years ago, glowering man and all, and I would find it again, and I will go on finding it. In every disaster this life still holds for us, because that is what I do, and it is the only thing I have ever been good at, and it has been enough, more than enough, it has been everything. They went, once some years into the marriage, to visit the grave of the great-uncle whose will had chained them together, and it was Keturah's idea, and the visit was one the Duke never forgot. The old man was buried, as spiteful men often are, alone and little mourned, in a cold family vault in a neglected corner, and the Duke had not been near it since the funeral, having felt for his great-uncle nothing but the anger any man feels for the author of a trap. But Keturah, in her way, had come to feel differently, and she wished to go, and so they went, and stood before the tomb of the bitter old man whose malice had made them. I have wanted to come, Keturah said, because I have been thinking about him for years, and I have come to a strange conclusion, and I wanted to say it here, where he is, whether he can hear it or not. She looked at the cold stone. He meant it as spite, we know that. He drew that will to punish, to chain the heir he resented, and a poor relation he cared nothing for, into a marriage he expected to be miserable, as his last cruel joke on a world he had grown to hate. That was his intention, and there is no doubt of it, and it was a wicked intention, and I will not pretend otherwise. And yet, she paused, and yet standing here I find I am grateful to him, truly grateful. Because his spite, which he meant as a curse, became the greatest blessing of both our lives. It saved 4,000 tenants, and healed a 200-year mistake in your line, and gave me you and you me, and made a happiness neither of us could have found any other way. He meant to trap us in misery, and he freed us into joy, and the freeing was as complete as the trapping was intended, and I cannot stand at the grave of the man who did that, however he meant it, and feel only anger. I feel gratitude. And under the gratitude, vexed coat, I feel something I did not expect, which is pity, deep pity. Because he was so wretched, this old man, so eaten by bitterness that he spent his last strength drawing a will to make others as miserable as himself, and he died alone and unmourned. Having wanted his whole life and never learned that the wanting was the trap, and he never knew, will never know, that his final act of spite came out as grace. He died believing he had cursed us. And instead he blessed us and never knew it, and that he never knew. That he went to this cold grave believing his act was a cruelty, when it was in truth the making of a great happiness. That is the saddest thing I know, and I pity him with my whole heart, and I have come here to tell him, though he cannot hear, thank you, you meant it as a curse. We made it a blessing, and I am sorry you never lived to see that even your spite could be turned to good. Because if you had understood that even bitterness can be turned, that there is no curse a determined unbitter soul cannot make into a blessing, you might not have died so wretched. It is the lesson that would have saved your life, and you gave it to us without ever learning it yourself, and I grieve for you, that you had the teaching of it in your own hands, and never read it. The Duke of Vexcote stood beside his wife at the cold grave, and he found that her words had done what he never thought possible, dissolved the last of his anger at the old man, and replaced it with the same strange pity and stranger gratitude that she felt. I came here hating him, he said. I have hated him for years, the author of my trap, and you have talked me in 5 minutes into pitying him and thanking him, which I would have said this morning was impossible, but you are right. He meant a curse and made a blessing, and never knew it. And there is no sadder thing than a man who dies believing his last act was cruelty when it was in truth the door to another's joy. I cannot hate him any more. I can only be grateful and sad for him, and glad past all measure that his spite fell on 2 people determined to make the best of it, so that the curse he aimed at us bounced off our refusal to be cursed and became the making of us. It is the whole of your philosophy again, Keturah, proved one more time, on the coldest possible ground, There is no curse that cannot be turned to a blessing, no spite that cannot be made grace, no bitterness so deep that a determined soul cannot find in it the seed of good. You have proved it on your aunt, and on my great-uncle, and on me, 3 bitter, frozen, ruined things, and you turned every one to warmth and blessing. And I stand at this grave and I think, that is the truest kind of power there is, not the coronet, not the fortune. The power to take what is meant as a curse and make it a blessing over and over, until there is nothing bitter left in your whole world that you have not turned to good. You have that power. I have watched it for years. And it is the only power I have ever seen that I would trade the whole dukedom to possess, and you have it for nothing, and you spend it freely, and it has remade the whole of my life, and the lives of 4,000 tenants, and even, in a strange way, the memory of a spiteful dead man, whom you have just forgiven and thanked and pitied over his own cold grave, and taught me to do the same. There is no one like you, Keturah. There has never been anyone like you. And a spiteful old man chained me to you, meaning a curse, and I will thank him for it to the end of my days. They laid a wreath on the cold grave before they left, the only one it had had in years, Keturah said, and the old man had been the author of their happiness, however he meant it, and even an author of blessings by accident deserved a wreath, and they went home to Vexcote together, to the warm house and the saved tenants and the healed line and the whole blessed life a curse had begun. And the Duke of Vexcote thought, all the way home, that he had married a woman who could stand at the grave of the man who trapped her and leave a wreath of gratitude, and that there was no measure of a soul finer than that, and that he was the luckiest man in England to have been trapped into loving her. They grew old at Vexcote, the once cold Duke and the woman who had cornered him into being loved, and the great house that had stood half shut and shabby the day she first saw it was, by the end of their long life together, one of the warmest and best-loved houses in the west of England. The estate flourished past anything the beggared Duke had dreamed of in his years of solitary struggle. The tenants prospered, and their children after them. The school Keturah founded sent up a steady stream of lettered children into lives their grandparents could not have imagined. And the whole district, which had been sliding toward ruin under a mortgaged Duke, became a byword for prosperity and good order, all of it flowing from a fortune a plain woman had signed away, and a spiteful will that had, against every intention, been the saving of thousands. The Duke of Vexcote never lost his wonder at it. To the end of his life he would sometimes stop, in the middle of some ordinary happiness, a grandchild on his knee, a good harvest in, his wife's hand in his by the fire, and be struck all over again by the sheer improbability of it. That a man who had armored himself against love his whole life, certain no one could ever want the person under the coronet, should have ended so surrounded by love, so warm, so thoroughly and permanently cherished for exactly himself. I have been thinking, he said to her on an evening near the very end, when they were both very old and sat together by the fire in the great warm hall, about the man I was, in that lawyer's chamber, glowering at the window. Do you remember? 40 years old, and hard as a fen in January. Certain to my bones that no one could ever love me, only the coronet, and the coronet worthless, spent down to nothing on the tenants, so that I had, as I saw it, not even the coronet left to be wanted for, only a hard, exhausted man alone with a debt he could not pay. That man believed his life was essentially over, that he would spend whatever years remained beggaring himself for tenants who could not thank him, and die alone and unmourned, and that this was simply his portion, the just wage of being a title with an unlovable man inside it. And then a will chained him to a stranger, and the stranger gave away a fortune and asked only that he try to be decent, and 40 years later, his voice thickened, 40 years later, that hard cold man is sitting by a warm fire, in a house full of the noise of his grandchildren, holding the hand of the woman who has loved him for himself for 40 years, having been loved and cherished and warmed past anything he believed possible, having buried the certainty of his whole youth that he could not be loved under 40 years of the plain daily proof that he could, and was, and is. I do not understand how a life can so completely, from that chamber to this fire, from that certainty to this. I have never understood it. I have only been grateful every single day, and I am grateful now, at the end, most of all grateful to a spiteful old man, and to you, and to all meant to trap me that freed me instead, and to whatever it is in this strange world that lets a hard, cold man be handed, past all his deserving, the one person who could turn a lifetime's armor into a lifetime's warmth. You have said all my life, Kitcherer answered, her old hand in his, that you do not understand how it turned. And I have told you all my life that there is nothing to understand that it did not turn by luck or by grace or by anything mysterious, but by the plainest thing in the world, which is choosing every day to make the best of what you are given. You were given a hard start and a spiteful will and a lifetime's certainty that you could not be loved. And you chose, when the will chained you to me, to let me try to unbrace, an inch at a time, against every instinct and let yourself be cared for and believe at last that the caring was real. That was not luck, Vexed Coat. That was the bravest choosing I ever watched anyone do, harder than any battle. To let down a lifetime's armor and risk being loved, you did that. I only waited at the crack in the armor patiently and refused to want anything and let you come to me at your own pace. But the coming was yours, the unbracing was yours. The choosing to believe you could be loved, that was the bravest thing you ever did, and you did it an inch at a time over years, and it is the reason we are sitting by this fire at the end of a warm, long life, instead of you dying hard and alone as you were so sure you would. You turned your own life, my love. I only opened the door. You walked through it. And it was the bravest walk a frightened man ever made. And I have loved you for it every day for 40 years. And I love you for it most of all tonight at the end, holding your hand by the fire in the warm house that your own courage, your courage to be loved made possible. And they sat together by the fire in the great warm hall of Vexed Coat, the old Duke and the woman who had cornered him into joy, while the house breathed around them full of the family, and the warmth and the whole improbable life that a spiteful will had begun and two determined souls had made. And the Duke of Vexed Coat raised his wife's old hand to his lips, as he had raised it 10,000 times, and gave thanks, as he did every night, for the worst seeming day of his life, the day a dead man's malice chained him to a stranger, which had turned out, through a plain woman's honesty and his own hard-won courage, to be loved, to be the door through which the whole of his real life had come and which he would not have traded, not one moment of it, not even the cold years before, for any easier road that led anywhere but here.